Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
All right, indeed it is. It is showtime, and 2025 version of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Welcome in, and hoping that you all had restful break over the holidays, because 2025 shaping up to be rather active on the political front. So lots to talk about. So let's get to the crew around the table. Keith Leslie is here, joining us from Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and Tim Hudak, the former leader of the PC party. And do you have a Bills tattoo anywhere on your body there, Tim?
Hell that you ask. What's it going to do to ratings? I think people are not going to come back if I answer that.
Well, we don't have to show it. That's all.
But go Bills.
Kathleen Wynne is here, or not. She is the former Premier of Ontario. We're having internet challenges.
I'm here, hi.
Yeah, we got you, yeah. And John Wright is our resident pollster, and let's just dive right into this, because the story of the week seems to change on an hourly basis as far as what's going on politically. Last time we met, Ottawa was in chaos thanks to the Chrystia Freeland announcement when we left. What would Trudeau do? What would he not do? It's been a bit of a mess all the way around, and of course that's compounded by what's going on in Washington. So let's start with the conversation that was had yesterday as we record this in Ottawa. The First Ministers and the Prime Minister meeting and talking about the strategy that they need to have around the threat of Trump tariffs. And, the Prime Minister kind of laid out the groundwork for everybody at their wrap-up news conference yesterday.
Because there's no sugarcoating it. The incoming administration's proposed tariffs against Canada would harm Americans. They would put American jobs at risk. They would put our collective security at risk. They would raise costs at a time when people simply deserve a break. Today, Canadian electricity powers millions of American homes and businesses each year. Over 4 million barrels of oil are shipped daily to refineries specifically made for Canadian crude, creating good jobs for Canadian and Americans alike. Notably, if tariffs are applied to Canadian oil, U.S. gas prices could increase by up to 75 cents per gallon. And we supply the United States annually with $84 billion worth of minerals used to support the U.S. defense, automotive, and agricultural industries that would otherwise be sourced from places like Russia or China.
And that, I think, Tim Hudak, is a fairly good synopsis of what the effects of the tariffs would be, certainly for the Americans. I'm not sure who Justin Trudeau's audience was in that particular moment, but I get that, we want to kind of lay the groundwork, and this would be bad for Americans just as bad as it would be for Canadians. But is that the message that we should be getting from the Prime Minister today?
Yeah, well, actually, I thought that was a good message for the Prime Minister. He looked in control. I'm sure a weight off his shoulders. It was a calm tone and, one of reluctance as well. Look, this is going to be a roller coaster ride. There is no doubt about it with somebody like President Trump in office. The structure of Canadian federalism, where the provinces has so much authority and we've got regional differences. And then, a vacuum of leadership in the Prime Minister's office. Nonetheless, I was encouraged by that broadcast. I thought they came forward with a united position. It looks like tariffs could be staged, right? Almost like the old DEFCON, where you've got the initial stage retaliatory tariffs and they increase the heat if things don't come on side. Happy to talk more about it, but I remain an optimist. I think things are actually going to work out to the benefit of Canadians after some rough sailing in the immediate part of January and February.
With all of that, in terms of the backroom conversation that went on, I mean, we know what they said out loud, Keith, in that news conference after the meeting. I think a lot of people were actually craving, and certainly the reporters in the room were craving for a little bit more detail. I understand the strategy of not showing your hand, But beyond, and we'll get into what Doug Ford had to say, but beyond what Ford said on behalf of the premiers as a group, there wasn't a lot of new in that conversation.
No, the most recent thing we've heard from Doug Ford as to, or the Prime Minister, in fact, as to how the American tariffs would hurt us is Ford saying it would cost up to 500,000 jobs if they went 25% across the board. That's some pretty scary stuff. That would devastate our economy. What we had here Wednesday, when the First Ministers invited, or the Premiers invited the Prime Minister to join them for their scheduled meeting and discuss, this, they came out with a mostly united front, of course, except for Premier Smith in Alberta, who just doesn't want to say, everything's on the table. She does not want oil and gas to be on the table as far as us putting tariffs on that, export tariffs, or export duties. I don't know if she has undermined the Team Canada approach, but certainly you could tell Doug Ford took a bit of exception to it when he said, country comes first, and that's her decision to do that. Because, I think Alberta and Ontario are two of the provinces that stand to lose the most if 25% across the board comes in right away. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy here. But Smith seems offside for the most part, that I think Canada needs to be able to at least threaten that everything is on the table, that all options are to be considered here. I also thought that Doug Ford sort of stole the day before everything started, walking in with that, Canada is not for sale hat on. But of course, he didn't mention that, you can get 99-year leases on some prime chunks of it, but we'll let it go at that.
Well, that's just Ontario's part of it, Keith. That's the issue. But I think the point that was interesting to me was that comment, and Tim pointed this out, it was a calm sort of, thoughtful approach from the Prime Minister. Immediately afterwards, Premier Ford, who sits at the head of the table with the premiers this year, had his say and, kind of reset the tone, reset the table.
Everyone has their interest at heart, and I respect Premier Smith. I respect that she's concerned about protecting her energy, and that's her choice. That is her choice. But I have a little different theory. I have a different theory that protect your jurisdiction, but country comes first. Canada's a priority. And I don't believe in jeopardizing one sector or another. Premier Smith's oil is Ontario's auto sector, right? So again, we all have different views and we can respect each other's views. But at the end of the day, when the tariffs come, it's going to affect Albertans. It's going to affect people from BC and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, all the way down the road. No one's exempt from that. And all I believe in, if it comes to that, let's have the tools in our toolbox to react, to send a strong message. But it's not going to be all of a sudden one province or one territory is exempt on this. When Donald Trump comes at us, he's not going to say, well, let's not worry about Ontario, they're good people, or Alberta. He's coming full tilt at Canadians as a whole. And that's one thing we have to understand. We need to be united. Donald Trump is a brilliant negotiator. That's what he's done his whole life. That's exactly what he's done. And he's sitting there with a big smile on his face thinking, wow, I'm going to divide and conquer. Remember one thing, united we stand, divided we fall. We need to be united.
And I don't think anybody is going to argue with that, Kathleen Wynne, but it was, the premier waving the Canadian flag. And if you saw the video part of that, he's sitting right next to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is smiling like a giddy guy saying, go for it, man. So it was interesting to see how maybe the Prime Minister was making the snowballs and Doug Ford was relied on to throw them.
Well, I think Ford is probably frustrated at what Smith is doing. He can't say that, but I think he's probably not happy because it is his year to chair the Council of the Federation. He would prefer to be able to have a united front. And, what he's saying is absolutely true, that Donald Trump will love if we're divided. He'll love if he can pick us off one province at the time. I mean, it's just a really bad national strategy to have provinces doing one-offs with the president-elect. So I'm sure there's some frustration behind the scenes. And I think that, the fact that the Prime Minister and Ford are on the same page with pretty much all of the premiers, that's a good thing. But I think we have to worry about Smith and who else she might come along. Although it was interesting hearing the Premier of Newfoundland talking about needing to play a more complex game. That that it's a good thing to not put all your cards on the table. And so I really understand why there wouldn't have been more detail. They're trying to put together a strategy. And in the face of Alberta doing what they're doing, they really need to take the time to put the strategy together. It's a huge problem that the Prime Minister, there's a perceived leadership vacuum in Ottawa. But I agree with Tim that, the Prime Minister delivered a very clear, coherent message. I think it's exactly what needs to be said at the moment. And if there weren't fireworks and so on, that's okay. The fireworks are going to come from south of the border. We need to be relentless and calm and united.
John, when we look at the strategy, though, from that perspective, and the premiers from Newfoundland, Labrador, not incorrect in saying this is a complex issue and so on, but just a couple of weeks ago when we started talking about this and the whole 51st state threat and the jokes and everything else, and then going to take Canada over economically. My sense of this is Donald Trump is playing checkers, and we want to have a chess move to counter it. And I understand how complicated it is, but he's highly transactional. Period. He's in the moment more than I think we're willing to actually, give him credit for, and that's what probably makes him dangerous. And to some degree, Danielle Smith is playing checkers against a guy who's playing checkers.
Yeah, I suppose, Dave, except that we've got so many more pieces on the board than he does. In the United States, it's him pretty much who's calling the shots, whereas here we're going to have all the premiers involved. So we do play chess. And in some cases, that works because you can have the soft and the hard pushing on different things. I have to say, though, that while the Prime Minister probably said what he had to say, he also said it because he's no longer really involved in the fight. He's gone from the front of the table to wallpaper. He even announced that he's not running again in his own riding. I don't want to say he's checked out, but outside of appearing in the United States after he spoke for his resignation, this is pretty much the first time he's been on camera. He's very calm, serene. He looked kind of sad to me. But nonetheless, I think the other thing that's changed, though, in the last 10 days is that we've, on this side of the border, heard all of the threats that could be imposed on us. And I think the politics of it is that there's people who are on the ground who want someone to stand up for them. And that's where you get not just Mr. Ford saying what he did, wearing the hat about Canada not being for sale. Okay, he's been like that. But we also had former Prime Minister Harper and former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien who have also dictated that kind of tone. So, yeah, maybe it's bad guy, good cop, bad cop type time. But I think we're still we want to have the country is looking for someone to step up and push back. And I think that's where Premier Ford has really crushed it in the last 48 hours. And the second thing is, I don't know when this is going to get underway in terms of whatever the negotiation is, whatever the fiat is with the Trump administration. But it's going to take more than just the premiers at the table. And Danielle Smith at some point is going to have to attend a meeting and be part of that Canadian representation. She may be defending Alberta right now, but it's going to get hot in the kitchen, and she's going to have to be there to help make out whatever the meal is.
And Dave, can I just jump in? Because the good cop, bad cop thing, the way that works the best is if the premiers are threatening something more dramatic than the federal government is, and then the federal government come in and can say, to the Americans, look, you got to work with us because we got these provinces and they have their own jurisdictional powers, and they may go harder than we think we should go. So work with us. But this is the reverse. This is This is Alberta saying it's not going to play, that it's not going to take a tough line. So the good cop, bad cop thing doesn't work as well, I think, in this scenario. And I think that's why it's a problem. I think that's why Ford is probably feeling pretty frustrated in this moment.
Dave, if I could as well, I just wanted to say that clip you played of Doug Ford, the question was about Premier Smith, not playing along with everyone else, but it was put to Justin Trudeau, and he just immediately said, "Doug, would you like to take this?"
Yeah.
To John's point about him being, almost wallpaper, he literally just said, "Here, Doug, take this one," because it's the crucial issue at the meeting yesterday or Wednesday was, what do we do about Alberta? And the Prime Minister just literally handed it over to the Premier Ford.
But Tim, isn't politically that the smarter thing to do for Trudeau? I mean, you put it back on the table in front of the premiers and let that happen, because as soon as he would step into that, he becomes the target of Danielle Smith's arguments and gets off track entirely.
Yeah, look, I think we did well yesterday based on the kind of vehicle that we have to drive, right? The Premier's Council is never going to be a sports car. You're going to have regional differences. And to Danielle Smith's defense here, like the raw wound of the National Energy Program and how Alberta's resources were stripped away, the unemployment, that wound has never really healed. So to contemplate that Albertans would have to pay an additional price if we taxed our exports instead of the States, you can get where she's coming from. So we just got to make the best of the vehicle that we have. Let me throw another point back here, and curious how the panel, if you don't mind, Dave, will react. Because while this is all consuming against, we're talking about the moment that Trump put something on X, right? We're responding to that. He has such an ambitious agenda. God knows how many different presidential orders he's going to put out on his first day. So does that mean he's going to be distracted by lots of other stuff and it'll be slow moving? Or does it mean that he'll have a low bar so he has something to brag about in compromise? I think it's going to be that at the end of the day. I think this ends up with us doing more in defense, doing more on our borders, keeping bad guys out, maybe some sacrifice on supply management, which frankly, I'm not going to run again, is overdue. I still remain an optimist that this works out.
Well, I mean, on that point, and that I think Keith cited the notes from Chrétien and Harper, Kathleen, and the underlying message in there is that the effect of what Donald Trump has done has actually made us focus more sharply on some of the issues that we need to deal with in this country. And I'll put it to you: would it not have been strategically, or maybe even politically or message-wise, more effective for the first ministers to have come out and said, here's what we're going to do in-house to actually clean up the details that we can control right now and over the next 6, 8, 10 months, whatever it might be. These are the things, whether it's trade barriers, interprovincial trade barriers, those sorts of things, seems to be low-hanging fruit that might have actually got to Tim's point to some degree.
Well, I think that the moves that the federal government is making on border control is that, I think it's the attempt to do some things that demonstrate to the Americans, to Trump, that we've heard, and that even though I think the challenges at the border between Canada and the U.S. are minimal compared to the southern border, we're doing what we can. You want to get into a conversation about supply management, you just watch Quebec and the Maritimes run for the hills. I mean, if you want disunity across the country, I mean, the government has said everything's on the table, right? That's the message that they're putting out. Whether that means supply management or not. I mean, Tim says he's not running again. I'm not running again either, but I can tell you what a divisive internal fight that would be if we put supply management on the table overtly. So, I think that we're doing what we can. I think the border stuff is important. It's visible. It speaks directly to an accusation that Trump has made. And I think that, interprovincial trade is not something that's going to catch the eye of the American government or of Trump. It's not going to be something we're going to be able to put in the window. The border issues are. Supply management might be, but I think that is, that's kind of kryptonite in terms of national unity, as is energy. I get that, but if everything's on the table and, the Premier of Quebec is coming along, then I think that's a pretty clear message that the Premier of Alberta should do the same.
John, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Tim to begin with, and that is that I think the ambitious agenda of Donald Trump, which will become more clear in what he states in his address, is so big that it's just going to take the machinery of government and everything else to kind of, get involved. I mean, even looking at the confirmation hearings over the last couple of days, I mean, you can see that there's going to be some sand in the gears, no question about it, and some prioritization. I think what we need to do is to kind of have internally a 10 out of 10 alarm going off, but outwardly having a 5, out of 10. We need to be pushing back at least on some of these pieces. But let me throw, if it's throwback day to the panel, I mean, you got two mavericks here. We've got maverick whisperers on Kevin O'Leary and Danielle Smith, who's gone down to Washington, met with Donald Trump. Kevin O'Leary over the last few days has been on every major talk show, beating up not only Trudeau, but also taking control of what he thinks Canada should be doing. I think we've got to be measured in how we deal with how this all unfolds with the administration. But I think the complication here is that we've also got people who are speaking directly to the president, not to the bureaucrats or others, and maybe encouraging him to do different things. So I think we've got to cover our flank that way. I'd be interested what other people think. It's more than a carnival going on, because if you can get to the president of the United States and even spend 2 minutes with him, that can have a big influence.
Well, Keith, it's easy to dismiss the Kevin O'Leary, as being clownish and, sort of a circus in terms of the show. But to John's point, he's the kind of character that Trump likes to listen to.
Well, he's the one that invited Danielle Smith to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump.
Right.
He was the in. So as much as the clown, or I see him being called a traitor an awful lot online for his antics this week, he's going to be the one out there promoting, starting simple with things. Well, a common currency could work for us all. It'll be better for all of North America. Anyway, the bottom line is Canada has to be prepared on so many fronts, because no one knows what Donald Trump is going to do or when he's going to do it. We may get a better idea on Monday with the speech, his inauguration, his 2.00, as Dave calls it. But specifically, he's told us a ton of things he wants done, but he wants the border addressed. Does that mean we're going to have, is it going to be a rollout of day one, a whole bunch of executives orders that are signed by the president that's somehow going to impact Canada? Can he do tariffs day one, or does he need to declare a state of emergency to do these sorts of things? We're not quite clear what he's going to do, when he's going to do it. So we have to be prepared on all fronts. But we need to be prepared with a more united front than we're displaying right now. That's just the bottom line. We need to get Alberta to somehow say, you just say everything's on the table. As Kathleen Wynne pointed out, I don't think that the eastern half of the country is at all prepared to put marketing on the board, marketing boards on the table. But this is what we have to be prepared to say, prepared to do right now. If we're going to, Doug Ford said this, but, if you're going to hit you hard, you hit him back harder. We have to be prepared to have everything and be ready to do that. We should also even, quite frankly, complain to Trump. Say, all the gun problem we have in Canada is coming from the United States. All of it, pretty much all of it. Why aren't you doing something about that? Help us with that, and we'll help you with the fentanyl and the other issues. We've got Doug Ford releasing a couple of Black Hawk helicopters for the OPP to be patrolling along the border. I guess that's going to help. I don't know if they have the right skill set for doing this, or if we have to lease someone else to do that. But at least the governments in Canada are taking efforts to at least address what we think are Trump's concerns, but no one really knows what's at the bottom, what his motivations are, and what he's actually going to do.
As we head for the inauguration of the President of the United States next week, we're also assuming that we're going to have some more clarity around who will be running for Justin Trudeau's job. And at this point, we're expecting an announcement from Mr. Carney probably today, Chrystia Freeland probably tomorrow, but it all has to be done by the 23rd. When last we spoke, Kathleen Wynne, we were a little hesitant to actually make any predictions about what may or may not go on. How's this shaped up as far as you're concerned in terms of who the players are? Any surprises? Dominic LeBlanc, for example, saying no thanks?
Yes. I mean, I don't know Dominic LeBlanc very well, but I really respect his decision to do the work that he needs to do. He's got a very prominent role right now. He's very close to Trudeau, so maybe he just gauged that it was going to be too hard to launch a national campaign. I don't know. I do think he's a loss to the race. We don't have, at this point, there's not a francophone in the race. I think that's a big challenge. I was very surprised at the way Christy Clark stumbled. I don't understand why she felt that she couldn't just say that, she had joined the Conservative Party to stop Pierre Poilievre and, move on. I don't think there was a problem, but she got all tangled up in that and is now out of the race. Because I thought the race was coming down to Freeland and Carney and Clark. That's what I thought we were going to be dealing with. And perhaps Karina Gould. And it looks like Karina Gould will be in. But honestly, I think that it looks like the race is coming down to Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. And, we'll see how that goes. That's what it looks like to me.
Well, and to some degree, Tim, what's going on in Washington and the tariff conversation has taken some of the steam out of the carbon tax election. And now we hear that both Carney and Freeland are prepared to, commit to canceling the carbon tax, finding some alternative vis-a-vis a climate strategy. It may be an easier sell for Carney, but I think that's going to be really hard for people to be convinced that Chrystia Freeland is all of a sudden converted.
Yeah, it's an interesting to wrestle with. I've been thinking about this myself, right? It is such a lightning rod that I cannot contemplate being a champion. I mean, I'm not part of the federal Liberal Party. I didn't support the policy, but it has become such a focal point for Canadians as a primary cause of the affordability crisis. I don't see how you can win a leadership campaign and say you're going to keep it as is. But if you do that, are you a hypocrite with the general public because you were the one that implemented it as finance minister? Look, I think this race is frankly more about how many rooms of furniture can we save in the House for the National Liberal Party to fight another day. It's not about winning the campaign. And I think that's why you have to embrace that position. Have an alternative. You want the environment to be on your side and the champion. But I think Freeland is making the right choice here in some pretty challenging circumstances. And I apologize, I lost track of the plot. What I worry about, one of the changes that Prime Minister Trudeau made to the National Liberal Party was to change it from political party to a movement, which meant memberships were free and anybody could join. So the notion, right, you're going to have a Team Hamas and Team Communist China who are helping candidates to sign up members and win the race. I guess, Dave, is between the communists and the terrorists. I'll go with the commies. But it's pretty frightening position if that window is open. I really think, last comment, I won this way. Kathleen Wynne won in a delegated convention. I think that the buy a membership, free membership, everybody gets to vote. It is a broken system. It has become corrupted, and it's actually dangerous. You should go back to a style of leadership that actually rewards hardworking party members.
Yeah, I think, John, to have some skin in the game, even if it was, the $10 or $20 or whatever it happens to be, at least there's some level of commitment there. But I realize that historically there have been issues with that paid membership and, the fundraising side of it. But has the party gone far enough to actually alleviate a lot of those fears about interference?
No, but I think we have to put this all in context. I mean, to any missing person, there are two phases of trying to deal with it. Number one is a search and rescue. So you try and figure out how you can find what you're looking for and rescue that individual. And then the next stage, if you don't find them, is recovery. And I think that's the stage that the Liberals are in right now. I mean, we're in the minutia of, whether you buy a membership or not. Yes, there are changes that are necessary, but the polling has shown that they've bounced up to about 25%, the Liberals in the polls. And the dominance of the Conservatives is so profound that, we're not going to be seeing a majority or even probably a minority government by the Liberals in the next election campaign. The question then becomes, who is best to take the Liberal Party forward over the next 4 to 8 years, because it's going to have to be completely rebuilt. and it's either going to be Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney on that final ballot. So what's interesting to me is to see how the players are falling out behind each other and the intermingling of it. I mean, Jerry Butts is now heavily involved with Mark Carney, has been. Mark Carney's wife works for Eurasia, where Jerry Butts works. You've got Katie Telford on that side. I mean, Mark Carney's even godfather to one of Chrystia Freeland's children. I mean, it's all intermingled. And I just think that, it's a bit of a game right now where we're trying to read something where, in fact, the reality is going to dictate that the Conservatives will, in fact, become the next government. And I think if I were advising Poilievre right now, it would be to, yes, link the two of, Trudeau with everybody else with a hyphenated name. But I think there comes a point where I've always wanted to see Pierre Poilievre be a little more, statesmanlike, as opposed to constantly being the guy with the boot on the throat of the person. And I think, when you're that far ahead in the polls, I think you want to calm it down and make sure that people are with you. So I think people are going to dismiss the Liberals or whatever comes out of that convention. But I think now is the time when the Conservatives have to really start thinking about the fact that they will be in power and how they're going to be perceived.
Well, Keith, then to that point, as the next leader of the Liberal Party, sort of a sorbet palate cleansing individual. I mean, when we look at it, because they won't be called interim, but to John's point, it's kind of an interim placeholder.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the question I think a lot of people, it's going to come down to a Carney versus Freeland vote on that final ballot, which I think a lot of people are expecting. Then you have to ask the question that Carney's going to get the question that Ignatieff got and answered poorly, which is, are you going to stay for the long term? Are you here for Canada? Or are you going to run back somewhere else, do another, high profile position somewhere else? I think Carney had the coup of the week, though, the political coup of the week going on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. He really put to bed this myth that he's an Iggy-like stiff. He just wasn't. He was funny at times. He was, it was as if the U.S. and Canada were breaking up a relationship. And he comes up with, it's not you, it's us. It was brilliant. It was perfect timing for him to come up with something like, even someone else wrote it for him. He delivered it perfectly. So I think Carney, as I say, had the real political coup of the week, just presenting himself. He went on an American show. He hasn't done any Canadian interviews, and I'm not happy about that at all. But he went on on an American show that had more Canadian eyes than any Canadian show would have had. So it was a brilliant stroke from that part of it. And it portrayed him as someone who's, it made it very clear. He's going to be campaigning as an outsider. Despite the relationship so close, he's godfather to Chrystia Freeland's child. He's going to put, I'm not a Liberal, or I wasn't, a Liberal Party member. I wasn't a part of the Trudeau cabinet, despite being a special economic advisor. So it's interesting that he's going to play from being from the outside, but he made it very clear that's what he's going to do. He's campaigning as an outsider, not associated with the Trudeau government.
Tim, I want to come back to what John said about Poilievre, and I was listening to some of the conversations he was having in Vancouver this week. Looked at the stories in the Globe and so on. I hesitate to say that there's been a complete change in tone, but he is actually getting at some of the stuff that John talked about, sounding a little bit more prime ministerial in terms of, here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to have a costed platform, and I'm going to make sure that, Canada's taken care of. We're not for sale. He's ringing all the right bells there, but at the same time, I still think, to John's point, he needs to be conscious of kind of dialing back some of the nastiness that seems to be foundational in what he has to say about most things.
And it's particularly, it seems, when I talk to any of my peer group, it's women who react most strongly to the nature of the tone. But look, foot on the throat, appreciate, we'll say there's a time to take that off and look prime ministerial. It still works, right? It's still ticking up, and you're going to need foot on the throat for whoever emerges as the next leader. I'm with you. I think that's attack dogs, and he's got some very strong ones. Melissa Lantsman comes to mind right away, who can help brand the next leader of the party. But I think in the crazy world we live in, this roller coaster 2025, he'll take the volume down. But I think it goes from a 9 to maybe a 7 as opposed to a 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think relatively speaking, even that would be noticeable. Kathleen, you were going to jump in on something that Keith was saying?
Oh, well, I just in terms of what Keith was saying about Carney's agility with Stewart, I completely agree. The accusation that he's Michael Ignatieff too, I think it's just not gonna hold. And the other reason for that is that he can run as an outsider, but he's running as a Canadian who has lived in Canada. Yes, he went to England and he was governor of the bank there for a time that actually gave him experience that would be very useful in terms of dealing with Trump. I'm not on any of the campaigns. I haven't signed up. I'm not aligned in any way at this point. But I do think that there are things that Carney is going to be able to do that a Michael Ignatieff never could, and his agility is going to be pretty clear. And for me, it's not just volume with Pierre Poilievre. It's tone, it's substance, it's the meanness of the message. So if he can change that, great. But he's not appealing to a lot of people. Yeah, I guess women, Tim, to your point. But I think it's more than just the volume. I think it's the whole package, and we'll see if he can change that. And I'm not sure that he's the kind of guy that Trump is going to respect. I mean, I think Ford with his hat is actually more the kind of image that Trump, because it's not that Poilievre's a bully. He's kind of a scrapper, and so we'll see. We'll see what the manosphere thinks about those matchups.
What does Poilievre campaign on, though, if both Carney and Freeland say, you know what, the carbon tax was of its time. We have to have something new going forward. We're going to eliminate it. It takes it away. What happens then?
Yeah, and they are saying, remember, they're saying they're going to take away the consumer-facing carbon tax, right? They're not talking about the industrial. I mean, I've actually been saying this is something that we could have done ages ago. So I think it takes a whole arrow out of Poilievre's quiver. He's going to have to pivot. And somebody was saying on the radio this morning that maybe, the capital gains tax. Well, the capital gains issue is not nearly as broadly based as the carbon tax is. So he's going to have to find something, and who knows what that'll be. But I don't think he's found it yet.
The only thing I would say is if I were advising a campaign, stick to your knitting and what you've brought to the table already. I mean, even in Ontario, Bonnie Crombie had said that she wants to do something different on the carbon tax, but the advertising keeps pounding away. It's the same ad we've heard for the longest time. I think the easiest thing for the Conservatives to do is just a link. Let's say Mark Carney wins. The very people that I just said are involved in his campaigns make it more than a hyphenated Carney-Trudeau team. I mean, I think the vulnerability for Mark Carney, let alone for Chrystia Freeland, having been there every single day and made these decisions with Trudeau, is the fact that Trudeau's team is now there with Carney. And, it's easy to basically have lots of pictures showing them bumping hands to get, fists together. Katie Telford and Jerry Butts involved, the very people that brought you Trudeau, 1.0 is going to bring you Trudeau 2.0. So I think that, again, I go back to this and sort of say, I think that I don't think that Poilievre should be bringing down the volume, but I do think the tone is something now that he can step back and let his own people run a campaign that makes him more acceptable to a whole lot of people who are still hedging and saying, geez, I don't know whether I like this or not. But I think he's got lots to work with for sure.
I'm opposite Premier Wynne and Keith on this, more aligned with John. Look, it's notching it down from 9 to a 7 on edge as opposed to volume. But yeah, of course, these are the guys that brought in the carbon tax. They did it for many years. They're planning on increasing it. You believe them for a second, they're not going to bring something back in if you give them another lease. And it's not simply the carbon tax as a single instrument. It's how it describes the government as a whole that was out of touch, that was telling people what they needed to do, that is not credible. And both Freeland and Carney can be easily attached to it. For sure, he's going to bang on that drum, because just saying you're not going to do it, you're not going to make up for the damage. It is simply saving a little bit of furniture, maybe in the side bedroom, before the house burns down.
Couldn't agree more. They're not going to get the Liberals elected with, but simply by saying we're going to get rid of the carbon tax. That's not going to do it.
Well, but they can't go into a campaign saying we're going to wave the flag for the carbon tax. That's a dead issue, period. Now, whether or not that helps the Liberals or not is a different issue.
Yeah, they've got to defuse that one for sure.
But remember, there's a whole segment of the population, folks, who may not have wanted to support Trudeau any longer. And I get that. I get that. The numbers don't lie about that. I get it. But there is a segment of the population that wants to have a plan to deal with the environment. You know, you cannot watch Los Angeles burn and not, I can't. And I think there are people like me who can't watch that and not understand that there has to be a plan. And I don't know that Pierre Poilievre is ever going to have a plan that's going to convince those people who really care and believe that we need to have a decent plan. I don't know he's going to be able to convince them. So if you can have a Liberal leader who brings in a plan, yeah, sure, they might have been attached to Trudeau but they can distance themselves from Trudeau by having a different plan. You know, I guess my personal experience, having come in and been elected after a government that had become unpopular, I found ways to distance myself from what we had done without distancing myself from my values and from what I believed in. So I just think we have to just take a breath and realize that there are disenchanted Liberals progressives who want a government that's going to tackle those issues. And Pierre Poilievre is not going to be that. He's not going to be that person. So, you know, they're looking for somebody. They're looking for a political home. And John, I know the numbers aren't showing that at this point. We'll see. But I just think we can't forget about that whole group of people who want to believe that it's okay to have a plan to deal with climate change.
Can I agree and disagree on that, just from having been across from Premier Wynne at that point in time? The Liberals will have a dead cat bounce, right? There's always going to be a dead cat bounce when you get rid of the old guy. And I think shedding the carbon tax is simply about some Liberals, because the stench of Trudeau is so strong they couldn't even plug their nose and vote for him. So they hope now they can plug their nose and vote for his successor, save a couple of seats. But the difference with Kathleen Wynne was that Dalton wasn't as bad as Trudeau is today, but she was given time. And then the very definite personality and set of policies had time to emerge and distance the McGuinty baggage. This is going to happen right away. And that's why I said there's very, very little chance of them bringing disaffected Liberals home to bring back many seats to the Canadian Liberal Party.
Yeah.
That's true, Tim.
Yeah, I think the timeline works against the Liberals, no matter how you carve that. I don't disagree with you, Kathleen. Do we need a climate strategy? For sure. But climate strategy is not going to lead the headline conversation. Right. It's still about affordability, John.
Well, it may be about affordability, but again, I want to sit on the conservative side and take a look and see what my playing field is left with. I mean, we talked a little bit about whether or not we were, the Liberals were able to see that by allowing everybody to buy a ticket there, it's open to some kind of interference. I mean, the reality is, even with that, there can be a subversive communications campaign to basically say, look, they left it open for everybody in the world to vote. Is the vote actually legitimate? Is the leader legitimate? I mean, the Liberals have left themselves open to so many different things here. And I think, we would all agree that if you get a leader in place and you've only got maybe a month and a half to prepare for a campaign, and you've just gone through a leadership convention, you've spent all of this money, you don't have troops on the ground, and let's say it is Mark Carney, and let's say he doesn't have a seat, so he's going to run out in Alberta. I mean, you got to kind of look at this and go, the fates are not with you. And I think that's the real issue here, is that the Liberals have run out of runway. Whoever gets there is going to be in that position as a party builder for the next 4 or 5 years. And the reality is, if Mark Carney doesn't win, then we're going to be back at this probably a year or two from now for somebody who has to get dirt under their fingernails to resurrect the Liberal Party again to live. And that's going to take a lot of work.
All right. So we've got the Liberal leadership going. We've got a pending federal election campaign. And this week we heard from Premier Ford suggesting, Tim, that he might need a new mandate to actually implement the spending that would be required to offset what's coming from Washington. I'm going to call bullshit on that because he didn't need a new mandate to. He didn't need a new mandate to do all the spending to get us out of and get us through the pandemic. So now maybe I'm wrong, but I don't quite understand. I'm not sure there's a tolerance or a level of readiness for an election in the middle of all this.
Well, it depends what you mean by that. So readiness for sure, right? I mean, the Conservative Party is in full
I think
gear.
readiness from the electorate's perspective. Sorry
Yeah.
for lack.
Yeah, I sense, though, that it's been socialized to such an extent and talked about for so long, there's almost an expectation. So I think the risk of a David Peterson-style backlash is rather minimal. Look, the Hawks increasingly on Premier Ford's shoulder want the election. They will look for two elements. One, the story of why you need a new mandate, and some angle here on Trump and being reinforced to fight back. And then secondly, what's the new plan, right? Why do you need the extra time? And here are the elements that I'm going to do, the other parties will not. I actually do not think there's going to be a provincial election. And the reason I say that is because Doug Ford is the most, along with his brother, Mayor Rob Ford, the most instinctive politician that I've seen. Tremendously successful with that gut instinct when he's interacting with people. And that'll work until it stops working, and it's working big time right now. And it's going to come down to the Premier's gut, whether he says yes or no. You will see, though, that he is, in terms of risks, big dice rolls, he tends to be on the more small C Conservative side. And until Premier Ford feels in his gut no election, and my guess is with all this turbulence and distraction, there won't be.
Well, the only thing I'd say I remember being an intern at Queen's Park, and that was in 1980-81. And the favorite phrase in that before Bill Davis and the minority government went to the polls was, I have no plans. In fact, I have no plans to have any plans. It was always, making sure that in a circumlocucious way, nobody knew exactly when he would pull the trigger. I think we talked about this in the fall, and we agreed that there was a window that was available for the Premier to go to the polls, and that he would use this very circumstance as the motivation to do so, to ask for a mandate. Look at the terrain that's changed. I mean, he's got a safe spot right now as the spokesperson for the country. He'll remain that way in terms of representing all of the premiers. I think given where he's at right now, he doesn't need to go. In fact, there's probably more saying he would abandon Canada by taking the time to do this. And he's in a perfect platform right now to build that whole role for him in the future, and to make, build the fences with the new government that's going into power. So I think, if I was a hawk maybe for him to move in the fall, I'm a dove right now. I think he stays put. He's commanding the stage. He's got all the premiers behind him. He's got time, and he needs to make sure that regardless of his own personal ambitions to get a mandate, that he makes sure that Poilievre and he have a relationship that sometimes in this last number of years has been pretty strained.
Well, Keith, I can just see the Liberals in Ontario playing back the clip. I understand that you've got to put your Ontario's interests here, but it has to be Canada's interests first, and that would be playing against him if he actually called an election next week, for example, because it would be seen to be dealing with his own personal political issue, as opposed to the role he has now been given, and I think is excelled at, in terms of being sort of taking the lead in terms of what we need nationally.
He's taken the lead in part because there's a leadership vacuum in Ottawa, and that's exactly why he can't create a leadership vacuum in Ontario for an election period. Right. It's just the wrong time. I think it would have, I think like John in the fall, I thought for sure we would have one. I, in fact, had a date picked March 27th. He's going to come back. He's going to have a spring budget. Boom, away they go, the election. But I think right now, unless, Donald Trump comes in and says, you know what, just kidding, I'm not going to slap those tariffs on, we can negotiate some stuff. Unless there's a clear runway for him, but then he wouldn't need a new mandate, would he, to spend all this money? So I think there is a danger of him going early. The perception being that he's abandoning his Captain Canada cloak just as he's assumed it. It wouldn't be a wise move. I don't think there'd be the Peterson-style backlash that he faced in 1990. We saw last year with Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. I mean, he had promised a fixed election date, went early because he needed a new mandate to deal with the federal government. I don't know they really needed that now, seeing as we're getting a new federal government. But nonetheless, he didn't get punished for going early. I don't think Ford would get punished for going early under normal circumstances. But given what's happened in the last week, especially, and him, as I say, in front of the Captain Canada stuff, I don't think he can call an election in Ontario, especially when we're having a federal election coming within a month or two.
It's still a lot of conversation and chatter in back rooms, and I know you're hearing some of it, Kathleen, particularly from some of the folks who are doing GR, and a lot of that kind of is, well, we're pretty much convinced that something's coming in the next couple of weeks. So there doesn't seem to be any middle ground here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, who knows? I've maintained that, the reason Ford would go, two reasons: that he's worried about running with Poilievre as a background, and the RCMP Greenbelt stuff. So, I think that those maybe those have taken a back seat to his role as the head of the Premier's table and the voice because of the vacuum in Ottawa. So maybe he won't go, but really, I don't know. I'm hearing candidates saying that they're getting ready because they're being told that it's going to happen, but no idea. It's going to, as Tim said, it's going to come down to, what the Premier is afraid of or not, or what he thinks he can get away with. I think that's what it's going to come down to.
So who in that circle then, Tim, is in his ear who's most effective? I mean, you talk about the Hawks, and clearly they have some influence, but they seem to be held at abeyance right now.
Well, they're getting their way, right? The Premier wins absolutely right. Candidates are told to get ready on any moment now. There's no sleep in the finance minister's office, right? Developing a budget plan to campaign on. They are full gear on the fundraising. Cabinet ministers have been told to clear off their desks with any controversial issues and advance nothing outside of the election agenda. So it's in full motion. You just need the Premier to wave the checkered flag. Is that what you do at the beginning of a race or the end? Wave the flag to into motion. But so your answer, Dave, who's in his ear? Well, it's his own gut. And Doug Ford, in his time in office, and he's had a 6-year plus run. That's been a tremendous run. And he's very much at his height now. His weakest moment was during COVID, when he was not communicating with average folks out in the street like he loves to do, right? Surrounded by probably young, mostly male staffers without kids, and made some odd calls. I think it's the people in Etobicoke. I think it's the people as he travels to Sudbury or St. Catharines. I think when he hears from them that they want this, those are the ones that have the ultimate say in Premier Ford's ear.
Just one before we go, and as I watched what's going on, and Kathleen, you alluded to this off the top when we were talking about what was going on with the First Ministers and Daniel Smith and the frustration on the part of Ford. Over the last 10 days, he's looked tired to me, where he has not had the level of spark and energy. And, the degree to which this mantle that he has assumed is going to actually weigh heavily on him. I wonder whether or not that actually has any kind of influence or effect on, is he ready to go to the polls?
Again, I honestly don't think I know the man well enough to be able to answer that question. I just don't know. Tim might be able to answer it better. It's obviously a stressful time. It just is. It's stressful. I think it's stressful for anybody who's paying attention to politics in this country. But for him, he's got to try to be a unifying force with the premiers. It's not like everything is hunky-dory in terms of what's going on at home. There are legal cases on Ontario Place. The teachers' federations are voicing their real concerns about what's going on in education, healthcare. Like, there's stuff happening locally. I ran a meeting in downtown Toronto about the closure of the supervised consumption sites. I know that's, it's a small issue, but it's a stressor on the government because it's a bad decision. It's bad policy. And, we can have an argument about that. It may be a populist decision, but all these things are going on while he's having to play this role. So it's not like everything on the ground in Ontario has stopped. And there are lots and lots of problems that this government has created and is dealing with that he has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then he has to don his cap, which is a great hat. I sent a note to somebody in the Premier's office saying, okay, the hat is great. It really is great. But the hat is not the whole story. There's a whole lot else going on in this very stressful time. So, yeah, I mean, maybe he's tired. Who knows? I don't know him well enough.
Well, but Keith, all of those things don't go away just because he calls an election.
Right.
I mean,
no. I mean, like we had the report, 81,000 people are homeless, and that it could double within the next few years, or double, quadruple if we actually have a recession. I mean, that's some serious shit that this government is really not yet dealing with, at least not adequately. And the municipalities are being, taxed to their limits, trying to figure out where they're going to get the tax revenue to pay for all these social services that are needed. That's just one minor thing. Canada is not for sale, but a large part of our healthcare system is available for profit takers, isn't it? I mean, there's an awful lot of things for Doug Ford still to be held accountable to. But if he's, just a general perception by most of the public right now is that he's out, speaking on behalf of Canada and doing a pretty good job and, taking it to the Americans and holding them to the account. There's an awful lot of other issues that this government should be held to account on. But right now, the media's attention in particular, and that means most of the public's attention, is on his role with this, the other premiers and the Prime Minister in the fight with Premier-elect Trump.
The only thing go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna throw in at Premier Wynne if break the rule again here. I cannot imagine the wait, right? Like being leader, being a CEO is a lonely job because ultimately you're there in the room alone, out for the walk, wherever you make your decisions on your bike, and you got to make the call. And now imagine that weight that a lot of the country, not just your province, is in jeopardy. And then imagine the weight of so much out of your hands because you don't know what an unpredictable president south of the border is going to wake up like and choose to do and announce on Twitter at any given moment. I can't imagine the weight. My question for Premier Wynne is, but you also want to be there. So do you kind of wish you were there around that table at the Premier's conference and such just to see what's going on and play a role? Or are you happy that pressure's not on your shoulders?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I've been asked this question regularly since we lost the election in 2018. Aren't you glad you're not there? No, I'm not glad I'm not there. I love the job and I loved the challenge and I had a team around me that I felt was up to it. So difficult as it is, it's the best job in the country, I think. So, yeah, it's not that I live my life in envy or, regret. It's just that it was fantastic. And would I want to be there? Sure.
Yeah, I kind of have the same approach to what I used to do. I consider myself a recovering news director. So, I loved it when I was doing it, but would I want to go back to it? I don't think so. John, you had a thought, a final word?
Just the last one. And that is, there's that great phrase of a week in politics is a lifetime. Anything can change. Any situation can come about. And I think this panel would agree that in the last month, we've had at least 4 lifetimes. I mean, it's just so unpredictable. Again, I think that the Premier should revisit Bill Davis and say, I have no plans at the moment and everything is on the table. Just keep it like that, but say that the commitment is to Canada. The last thing he wants to be, accused of is abandoning the country because he's Captain Canada right now for some self-interest in a short campaign that may, while he's campaigning, end up costing Canada something that he's now leading. So I think he's filling a vacuum. He's going to be there for a while.
Well, that was a good spirited way to kick off things for 2025, and Happy New Year to you all who are watching, listening, and certainly to the crew around the table. Keith Leslie, Tim Hudak, Kathleen Wynne, and John Wright. And by the way, if you're not listening to us on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or any of the other platforms or the audio podcast platforms, we're on YouTube as well, but we're also on News Talk 1010 on Saturday morning, so you can find us there on their iHeart app, or you can listen. Actually, they have a thing called the radio, and you can turn it on, and you can dial it in, you can find us there. So all good things to talk about, and guaranteed next week, as John said, who knows? We might be on a completely different political planet, but we'll be around the table. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.